Do you want to know how to talk to teens about sex? I'm Nicholeen Peck, and I teach all over the world about parenting, good communication, how to build strong family bonds, child development, and education, all through the lens of the principle self-government. And in this video, we're talking about those delicate conversations that need to be had about sex. In this video, we're going to talk about how to have clear, calm, values-based conversations with teens about sex. I don't know about you, but we are a values-based family. In fact, our family discussions often turn to what's right, wrong, good, bad, true, and false. And when it comes to human intimacy and sex, obviously, there is no exception there. Now, children, teens especially, are being bombarded with images and conversations about sex and sexual encounters and sexual acts and preferences. Even some schools get in on it by talking to teens in sex ed class about their sexual preferences, desires, what feels good and doesn't, which they shouldn't be talking about all those intricacies of sex and stuff in the classroom, but depending on where you live, that could be happening. So what do you do as a parent to prepare your child to think about sex with a values-based lens and to prepare to be safe in this world of sexual exploration and experimentation? Number one thing is you've got to make sure that you are calm about the topic. Nothing that you do is going to force your child not to make a sexual decision that you don't want them to make. So let's say you don't want your child to ever see any pornographic image. Good luck, by the way, just because the world we live in, they're going to encounter something sometime. But let's say you never want that to happen with your child, and you are making sure that they never encounter it yourself. Guess what? When they happen to encounter something like that, that doesn't mean that you are a failure. And so you shouldn't be stressed out and not calm about the topic of pornography. You should be very calm, be very clear, matter of fact about it. Why is it that we don't objectify other people's bodies and look at them for leisure? Why are we not engaging in voyeurism with our neighbors, but we would engage with it on the computer or in a book or something? There's a reason. There is an appropriateness to humanity that keeps us respecting and caring for others and not just thinking of ourselves. And this is why we don't engage in pornography. I mean, there's other things too where you can get addicted to it. It plays with your brain chemicals. It can ruin relationships. It can ruin other future sexual encounters because you're exploitive to another person. You know, all of that kind of stuff can come into play when you're not respectful when it comes to sexual topics and knowledge, and definitely learning through pornography is not the right way to learn about sex. A lot of people who assume that all the young people are going to learn about sex through pornography, sometimes they teach someone way too much about sex because they don't want them to go to pornography. Sometimes that leads them to pornography. Sometimes because of pornography, then they're having conversations about sex. The two in our modern age end up linked together. Now, I don't know if you're watching this video because you have a child who has friends who are engaging in sex, or because you in your teen years engaged in sex and you don't want them to, or if they do, you want them to have certain boundaries and precautions put in place. I mean, really, we could talk about the gamut here, but I am a values-based person, and so my perspective on sex when I talk to children about sex is, listen, we don't do it, and here's why. and I start focusing on why. Well, our bodies are a gift. They have a certain purpose and thing they're supposed to accomplish. This world isn't just about us. We have a higher reason for being here than just our own self-gratification. Plus, what are we willing to do to other people just because we want to have some sort of, sensation or kink or something like that we want to experience? I usually turn to respect of others in the conversation about sex. Of course, respect of self is also really important, because some young people start engaging in sexual exploration, experimentation, and activities because they don't want to disappoint somebody else, and then they start disrespecting themselves. They feel uncomfortable about it, but they still do it because they don't want to disappoint somebody. Now, there are different types of processors. Some people are obligers. In fact, one of the top tendencies that a person could have is an obliger. I have videos on this channel about the 4 tendencies, as well as a video all about the obliger tendency, so you might want to go and look at that. I'm not going to go into detail now, but some of your children, if they are obligers, could fall into sexual pleasing, in which case they would not be respectful to themselves. The best way to engage in sex with another person is to plan ahead of time. How do we want this to be? When do we want this to happen, right? When is a good time to engage in sex? When? Now, hopefully your children already know all the birds and the bees about sperm and egg, and it takes a man and it takes a woman and all that kind of stuff, and that they know the body parts are different and those types of things. By the time they get to their teen years, usually that part has been covered. So I'm not going to cover that in this video. I think I have other videos that you could look at that would go into more detail there. But once they get into their teen years, then we've got to talk about the when, the who, the why, right? And maybe even get a little bit into the how too, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about when. When do you have sex? Well, in my family, we would say, well, we're not going to have sex until we're married. Like, that's just us. Now, I know that might seem to you like, well, that's a little weird. I'm turning off this video right now. And I can understand that if you would feel that way, because every family's values and their backgrounds are different. But, we're a religious family, so that's how we think of it. And we want to save ourselves for that person that we're going to spend our forever relationship with. But let's say even if you just want to make sure that you save it until you're old enough to be in a committed relationship, that you're old enough that you can raise a child. Because ultimately, that's what sex leads to, isn't it? Now, I know that there's all kinds of things that you could do to take precautions, and those are going to be talked about probably at school. You can mention them if you feel like you need to, if your child is already engaged in sexual activity and you feel like they need to know about those things, and if that's something that you feel okay discussing with them. The whole point of sex, as far as biologically speaking, is not about pleasure. The point of sex is actually to procreate and have children, which means you have to be willing and able to care for a child if you're going to engage in sexual activity. So that needs to be told to the children, because that's the when, right? So even if you're not married, are you willing to raise a child if you create one? Well, if that's the case, then go ahead, I guess, and engage, right? That's the when. Okay, the who. If you could create a child, which could always happen, then is it somebody that you want to have a relationship with forever? Because once you create a child with that person, now that child partially belongs to them. So you're going to have communication with them forever. This is why marriage is the time that most people think about, actually having sex and having children. All right. So you have to be, willing to answer that question. And then the why. Why am I engaging in this? Is it because I want to feel something? Is it because I get caught up in a moment? Is it because I have a lack of planning? Or am I actually planning to do this, right? Am I saying, well, because I want to have a family with this person, and because that's a direction we're heading, and we're open to the idea of a family, which is why we've put a ring on it, we've decided to get married, then that's why I would do this. It's a sign of love, deep commitment, because you are saying, I am going to do this with you because I am willing to accept that we could have a child together. I am willing to be with you forever. ever. It's a sign of commitment. And that type of stuff is never talked about with teens. You know what they talk about? They talk about the birth control methods. They talk about, oral sex versus all the things. I don't even want to say all of them because what's the point here on the channel, but all the different ways you can experiment with sexuality. And that is, maybe slightly beneficial, but there's never any boundary in any of it really, except for you do what you want to do. And the whole conversation goes back to consent. And consent does not answer the who, the when, the why. Consent just answers, do I have a desire? It doesn't question if something's right at the time, if it would be a good thing for me to do that at that time with that person, if I'm willing to have a full commitment with that person. Consent is just a completely selfish thing. So as much as we want to make sure that people aren't getting raped and that, if they ever were to do something sexual, that it didn't happen to them, but that they, did agree to it in some way, that is in no way any type of a high bar. In no way. So if I was talking to my teens about sex, I would say, hey, listen, we're going to have one of those weird conversations, okay? The kind when you're like, when is it over? But hopefully you're going to also recognize that there is nothing I will not talk to you about. Nothing. You can ask me any question. I don't care how, much of a detail it is that you think, might be gross or whatever. You can ask me because I've done it and I'll talk about it. And so then I would start having the conversation about sex. And I would talk about our roles in relationships with other people and the who and the when and the why. And then I would say, there's a lot of different things that people do, like how they engage with other people. There's some people that fall into circumstances of having sex before they know it. And this is because they, get tricked into it or they get caught up in a circumstance. So how are you going to stop that from happening? What type of boundaries are you going to establish for yourself? So then I would talk about proactively creating boundaries where we know that's a stop, that's a no. I don't know about you, but when I was engaged to my husband and I knew, okay, soon we're going to be having sex, not yet, but soon, we had to set boundaries for ourselves. We had to say, listen, this is going to go too far too fast. We have to have a curfew. We have to have we're not just hanging out, alone, in these types of circumstances for too long. That's going to be a no. And we have to have boundaries of where we'll touch each other and not touch each other. And we're going to save on some things until marriage because we're going to respect each other. We're going to respect that union. We're going to respect whatever future child that could possibly come down the line. That's what we chose to do. And you'll want to talk to your children, even if they're going to engage in their teen years. And even if you're okay with that, they need to know their boundaries. They need to know what the dangers are for some things too. Are there diseases? Yes, there are. You need to talk about those things. You might have to mention what can happen with those different diseases and that type of thing as well. Ultimately, can you make your child have sex or stop your child from having sex? No, you can't. It's the conversation, the education, the support that you're there to talk to about anything. Setting the standard, but letting them know that no matter what happens that you're there to talk to and that you're going to help them with certain things like creating a curfew so that they don't fall into something that they might regret later. You'll want to talk to them about some of the social implications of sex or even just making out, really. They don't maybe understand that, okay, if you just have a NCMO, right, that non-committal makeout, if you have that with someone, afterward you kind of don't even want to talk to them. You sort of feel like, oh man, why did I do that? That's not my boyfriend. That's awkward now. You have a hard time even looking at the person. That's a social negative consequence. So this channel is all about self-government. We talk here about consequences and skills and how to learn self-government, how to teach it to our children. A big part of that is pre-teaching the knowledge that they need to have, teaching them the consequences that they need, teaching them to give no answers and to accept no answers that they have given themselves in the moment when they need it. So they need those skills of self-government that are so vital. In fact, there is a video I highly recommend you watch next that will go into more of those skills and principles of self-government, which will help them accept no answers from themselves, from you about sexual activity, give themselves instructions about what to do with peers so that they can maintain those sexual boundaries, and just be more successful, but how you can also correct it in a self-governed way. The video is called The Not So Known Secret for Parenting Success. Click on the link to that video next. I'll see you there.